Good
Thank you.
morning.
Good morning, Kasha. I'm super excited to be here with you again and having another conversation, which is not that different than the one we had last week. And when you reached out and said, "Hey, could we talk about, leadership, mastermind, business, choosing your circle of peers, communication, all of the things," I was a definite yes.
Yeah, I thought it's important because I remember last year when, we started this process, and I had all kinds of other commitments happening at that time locally. My partner just left the city, and I really wanted to connect more locally because otherwise I was just staying at home. So that was my focus when we first started. And I knew that, to be able to really benefit fully from being part of the mastermind group, I had to shift to be able to make more time to connect with, everyone who's in the group, to make the meetings, which I was having trouble making at that time. And I really had to make that time this year. And so I wanted to share that because I'm sure that there are some people in a similar situation. And it's been so valuable this year already for me, just shifting that focus the past 2 weeks, right? So we're always in a different season of life.
Yeah, it's true. A season will shift, priorities will shift, and which then we open up new space. We wind certain things down, we make more space for something new. And I think you touched on a thing that's very important. It's there is a certain amount of time and attention that is necessary to cultivate relationships in order to find that depth and collaboration.
I think it's essential to really have an understanding of what we are doing, whether that person is going to be, a good fit as a peer collaborator, as a client, to um, make time for that curiosity and understand what it is that they really want. And the challenge with that is that sometimes people don't have any idea what they really want or what's a true priority for them right now. So that's what I found is important is to be able to have those conversations to understand what is it that they would actually benefit from if we do something, right? What's at the heart of it? What's important to them? And to
Mhm.
center it around that.
It's so true. I had a private client ask me last week, how should I present this opportunity to share my work or to become an affiliate? And I said, well, you know, you have to first identify, do they want to be an affiliate and what do they want in exchange? And so it's like before you go create something in a vacuum or in a notebook doing a little brainstorming session. And so it's exactly what you said. It's like you have to be able to understand, what does this person want? What makes it worth it to them? Build everything around that, and the whole process will be much easier.
Yeah, and I had a really interesting chat with someone in California this week as well. And we were talking about product market fit, right? Because this is the biggest reason that a business fails in the early stages is that it takes too long to find that fit. And often it is a matter of, sometimes even over relying on data that's not current anymore, not having the right conversations, not having enough conversations. And it can be challenging to make time for all of that, right? But that's the priority when a business is trying to launch something new. Like I have been, with my getaways, with the gatherings, to really look at where is the focus there, what message it is actually landing, and I had slightly different areas that people were sharing with me, slightly different priorities, but also some overlap in there. So it was really informing me about where to focus the messaging. And I've been adapting, evolving it as I go. right? It's still something that's a learning process for me because I haven't actually been working in the startup world that much. I was working in global organizations for a very long time, which are sort of more status quo. There's not as much innovation. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges there is that the collaboration that I've seen is much more surface level
Mm.
than what I started to have to learn when I stepped into being more of an entrepreneur. And it definitely has been a step-by-step process with you, right? It's not just something that happens overnight. And we've known each other 10 years now, right? There's been so much learning in terms of storytelling, in terms of the messaging, making it easy for people to actually get on board instead of putting barriers into place, right? There have been so many lessons. And I think that what matters so much is having those people around us who can see what we can be doing to pave that path and make it simpler, right?
Mm.
To have that feedback around us and to with people who are willing to share it. And it may not always be the right thing. We have to then take that into account and decide, is this something that aligns? Is this feedback something that may help me? Or is this something that, may maybe be valuable later, right? It's
Mm.
up to us then to make those choices. But what I think is important is for any peer community to have that care, the trust to share and to offer perspective, to contribute to each other as much as we can. And that takes a depth of knowledge of each other. And one of the things that I've really found, which has been fascinating for me, is that I feel like we're in a real curiosity gap in
Mm.
the world. So many of us have been trained by the education system that we have to be smart, we have to know the answers. This is what school has been all about, right? It's all about, passing the exams based on what we've been told. And entrepreneurship is just completely the opposite of that, right?
Yeah, because in school and in the educational system, there's also only one right answer. Whereas in business and entrepreneurship, there's a lot of right answers. You got to find the one that fits you like a glove. So yeah, the thinking, the thought process is just coming at it from a totally different angle.
It is. And, when I was working with global companies, I saw that it was really this curiosity gap, this empathy gap, which is all about just understanding people, was what was causing a lot of their issues, right?
Mm.
It was, during COVID with one of the global companies I was working with, they couldn't get to their customers as easily, right? And so it was very clear that there were changes that they didn't know about that had taken place, and they were relying on old data and not reaching out on the phone. They were used to going to meet people in person at that time and having conversations like many sales reps do, right? They go and buy lunch. And this just wasn't happening. And they didn't really have any other way to penetrate through to connect with those people at that time. They didn't have a backup plan.
Mhm.
And it was a time that they were really struggling because of that. And I think that, finding those paths, finding those ways of connecting to deepen those relationships and to really understand what's driving someone, what, is really going to be the key thing that they need to know that's going to help them make a decision. Ultimately, it's their decision to make, right?
Yes.
What has been your experience with that? Is that something that you've also noticed? Do you find people are curious enough with you personally when they have conversations?
Mm, no, sometimes what I find fascinating is the things that I go into a conversation or a meeting knowing I'm open to that the other person never even cracks the door open to. And I always leave thinking, going, I would have done this for you. I would have partnered with you on that. I would have done this. I would have done the other. but it was never even opened up. And so what I sometimes wonder is, do people stop short in that curiosity because there is this fear of rejection? There's all of these, well, she wouldn't be interested in that, or she's too busy. The assumptions that we make about somebody else or another company can become a huge roadblock. And going back to something that you said, I'm finding in the last 12 months, and the pace is only picking up, is you cannot rely on old data. You cannot look at what worked, even what feels like a short time ago. You have to put yourself in this position where you're in the ongoing real-time conversation, and you have to figure out how you're going to do that to where it's supporting you and it's not overwhelming you. But if you don't have your finger on the pulse, you think you're okay until you're completely irrelevant and you don't even have a clue what's going on. And the way you get this slap in the face is your sales go down and your customers are no longer interested in what you have. And unfortunately, it takes people experiencing that to really make changes a lot of the time. But yeah, I think being able to just be like, hey, like for example, I am excited about a couple conversations that happened recently. Three people reached out to me. Well, actually, you're four. So, and said, hey, listen, can I throw something out to you? Or here's something I've been thinking. Would you be open to this? Here's an idea. And we might start here and we might end up there. It doesn't matter, right? But because there was this, hey, I've been thinking about you. I just have something. Could we just talk this out loud? And I think that's the other thing. It doesn't need to be perfect. We don't have to have all of the details ironed out, but if we know how to invite somebody into a conversation or ask one question, it can open up a whole new world.
Yeah, and it's a great point because I think also, especially, there's a sense of nervousness that goes into, if we talk about formal startups, they have to pitch, right? They have to pitch to investors, and that pitch has to be perfect at that point, right? But to be able to get to that point, you have to have conversations. You have to understand and build that pitch. It doesn't just get, created out of the blue. You're not guessing at that stage, right? So there's a process to it. And I remember when I first reached out to you, it was in the fall, there was this process of actually, this connection of mine in Peru who reached out to me first 2 years ago. And we had a conversation about that. And I thought, oh, that sounds great. Let's see, let me research. I've never been to the Galapagos Islands. So it was my process of doing research first, having conversations with people who had been there to look at what can I create that's actually going to be a little bit different than what's out there already and something that's going to be interesting. And I could see that it was a destination that was growing in popularity. People were being, drawn there because of the diversity of life, the wildlife that you can't find anywhere else in the world, right? You could go to Hawaii, and Hawaii is actually a lot more expensive these days than it used to be, right? And I saw someone in the thread going, I don't want to go to Hawaii. I want to go to the Galapagos Islands. My kids are going to have things to do there. They're going to be fascinated. So I could see what was happening on social media in these travel groups. And all of that helped me be more informed about what I was creating. And then I, thought about, well, who's the most adventurous person that I know? It's you, right? I knew what your lifestyle was like before when we were both traveling, and I knew that you're adventurous and open-minded. And so you were the natural person for me to start having conversations with about it, to understand what you would be drawn to, right? Because you could go by yourself, right? You could go with your family on your own anytime. And you said that you would want to be around people who understand your work. You actually wanted to be with people who get you. And then when you shared that with me, I thought, wow, this is really something I hadn't actually thought about yet with regards to this trip. And then I had a conversation with Lee and a few other people who in that 1 week told me the same exact thing. It was a systemic change consultant here locally told me the same thing at the end of our conversation. And really, I was sitting there in that moment of awe, thinking these amazing people aren't surrounded by people who get them. They don't have somebody to necessarily talk to locally in person about their work and what they're excited about, their potential ideas down the road. And so that was what really cemented it for me to go forth with this because, I had my own hesitations. I was worried. I'm caring for my parents. Things pop up out of the blue. Sometimes my mom doesn't, takes her 4 hours to make a soup, and I have to pop in with a meal because she's got brain fog. And so I worry about those things in the background. And at the same time, I know that I need this for myself to have this time to be with people who also are doing similar work in the world because she doesn't understand what I do either. And a lot of people don't, right? And because
Yeah.
it really takes that curiosity and that depth of knowledge. And I don't get that many questions either from my family or from others. She does understand the Galapagos Islands, though. So I'm pretty happy about that.
That's a win. Yeah, you know what I found fascinating, Kasha? So, you know, Derek and I, we had lived all over, right? We traveled, the two of us, and we came to the States, had two babies, went and traveled with the whole family. And so I had got a lot of like, oh, you're always gone and you're always away from the holidays and nobody gets to see the kids, like all of the guilt trips, right? And so we came to my hometown 5 years ago. And what I found very fascinating is every person that I grew up with, every person I've known, right, since I was born, everybody I'm related to lives within like a 3 mile radius of where I'm sitting right now. And in 5 years, not a single person asked me about our travels. They didn't ask me what Derek and I do for a living. How did you fund that? How were you able to homeschool your boys? Not a single person. My family has no idea what I do. I hear rumors around town like, do you think they sell drugs? Do you think Derek's this? Do you think she's that? But nobody, not one person in 5 years has asked me.
That's incredible. That's a real shocker, right? And I think that's very it's a sad state of reality in our current society that it's like that. And I really think part of that is the busyness that people are in, wrapped up in their own, hamster wheel
Yes.
of busyness, which is something that I've seen much more of after coming back from Australia, right? I know I shared last time that in Australia, everybody automatically has 4 weeks of holidays. That's just the norm. And, people go swimming before and after work. If they live anywhere near the beach, the quality of life is just completely different than it is in many places in the world, right? So this is my life, and this is one of the reasons I stayed for so long in Australia. I had meant to go for 1 or 2 years, and it was 15 years. And, it was really an eye-opening experience for me to have that quality of life. And after that, I wasn't willing to settle, for anything
Yep.
else. And I've made these choices now to be a caregiver and to be there for my family. I'm the only one. There's nobody else that we can count on. And, I still have the water, as I mentioned, nearby. And at the same time, it's something that's a season for me because I have the adventure piece in my DNA, and it is something that is really important to keep that vitality and to keep the energy for all the other work that I've been doing in the world to support other leaders. It allows me that clarity and that opportunity to really fuel the creativity part, right? Because when we're in our day to day, it's, important to make that space and time. at the same time, we don't have things that trigger our creativity as much because we're in the same environment,
Mm. Yeah.
right? And just seeing the colors, there was one iguana that a friend of mine just posted recently because he was just there right now. This pink and blue iguana.
I saw that one.
And, it just makes you think, wow, this actually exists in the world. And I had no idea, right? So
Mm.
I love those moments of awe and those moments that help you remember that this earth is absolutely incredible. It's amazing. And to share that with people who get us, who understand what we do, to have a bit of the opportunity to think about some of our ideas that might be a bit out there, because this idea felt out there, you know, being here. I think, being a caregiver has put there's a different level of weight on my shoulders that I just didn't have before, right? I was off here, there, everywhere by myself. I didn't care who came with me. I was super happy to be by myself. But now, I'm in a different stage of life as well, and it felt like peers are really important to me because in entrepreneurship, it takes that group where you can have conversations about business and about life and looking at people's alignment with values, right, is so important. And with the mastermind group, to really be able to have that opportunity to get to know each other is so, so essential, right? Because I find I've shared some feedback. People are not that open to feedback unless we actually build a relationship, unless we
Mm.
actually know each other, right? There's a sense of defensiveness. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about today is that willingness and the willingness to influence each other in a
Mm.
peer community, in a mastermind, to explore together. That's what it's all about, right?
It's true because this is the honest conversations that can be challenging, that can put us in this position where we're thinking about things we weren't thinking about before. Maybe we're starting to question things we hadn't questioned, but it can open up so much. And I think you're right. Once I know somebody genuinely cares about my success and they're not going to say or do something to undermine me or to actually take me off track, but when they're genuinely seeing a perspective that they believe would help me, then this practice of being open enough, stepping off of what I think I know, of what my experiences told me, this, that, and the other, and just going, okay, I'm going to listen. Because I know for myself, there's been some times that somebody has thrown something out at me and I'll listen. And then it might be 10 days later, it will click like, that's how that can be helpful. And I do believe this is what's missing for a lot of entrepreneurs is a peer community where this happens. They care, they're on a similar path, and they can speak in ways that most people out there can't because people who live a completely different life or make money in a completely different way, they just don't get it. They don't. They're not going to. So instead of going at it alone, right? It does help us have a broader perspective. I mean, this is why we love travel as well. Travel gives us a broader perspective. And once you have that perspective, you don't lose it, you maintain it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things in life. To me, travel is the most, important education that you can have, right? And just to see that things can be done differently, completely differently, is, I think, incredibly important. And, as we're talking, I have a few different thoughts coming up, right? That vision can change so quickly, right? And I I actually had this idea a long time ago already, but I was in Indonesia and I tried to create something like this there, but the safety just wasn't there. I didn't feel comfortable bringing people. I met with people, I requested life jackets, seat belts, and it just wasn't happening. I requested 7 life jackets and I got 3. So I could see that it just wasn't going to work. And, I had to drop it. And so there are times that we have an idea that it's just not the right time or place for that idea, right? And it can then take time to recreate it in a different way, in a different place. And, sometimes it is about the right people in our lives to actually be able to make those things happen, right? And I just want to give a shout out to Courtney today because Courtney knows we've been talking about the parents, and there are, of course, many other people in the same situation. And Courtney created a little group for, people with aging parents in the
Mm.
Alive community. So she saw the need and she created it. And that's what it is, right? It's about the relationships and understanding what's happening for people. What could they benefit from? How can we support each other? And that connection piece is so key, right? Because if we don't understand, we can't really support each other very well. It's going to be surface level.
Mhm.
And I wanted to talk about that because I still think that just so many relationships end up very shallow. And, it's kind of like a skim through process of seeing, well, what is possible here, but without having the conversations, or at least exchanging a few voice messages, right? Having little chats on Messenger, etc., keeping the connection going and building the understanding because it can take time for people to know. Then it's hard to create, you know, the thing that we are trying to create.
Yeah, it's true. The number one, I've asked various questions in Facebook groups about networking and what you love and what you dislike. And the number one answer that people always say that they dislike about business networking or masterminds or whatever related is surface level talk, small talk. This is the number one reason they dread going. They're not sure if they want to go again, is because you have this idea of how you want it to be. You get there and you're like, hi, how are you? What'd you do this weekend? How's the weather? Da, da, da. And yet, here's the fascinating thing. After I asked this question so many places and did screenshots, what I realized is who is perpetuating the small talk if nobody likes it? Turns out it's us, right? So every person who answered, I hate small talk, probably walked into the room and was like, hi, how are you? How's your week been? Because this is habit. It's habitual. It's practiced. It's learned. It's observed to go surface level. Okay. And one of the things that we've been taught is to not make other people uncomfortable, especially when we don't know them. I just met them. This is our first encounter. Let's just make this easy. And so that's why we ask questions like that. But the truth of the matter is it doesn't put anyone at ease to answer that question 7 times in an event or in a Zoom call or at a dinner. So, what we are doing, what we're realizing, what we're learning, and we're beginning to practice is if I'm willing to go first, if I'm willing to say, Kasha, what's one thing you need today? Just tell me straight up, and I'm going to go talk. I'm going to go figure out in my communities, I'm going to go send some messages. I'm going to figure out a way to get you that one thing. If we said that, asked that, and did that with every person we encounter, our relationships would have a completely different dynamic. But it takes one person saying, I'm going to step out of this. I'm not going to ask you how you are. I'm not going to ask you how your week's been. I'm going to go to something more meaningful. And then I'm going to take responsibility for making something happen that hasn't happened yet. And then we're going to have a bond and a connection that's vastly different than most people have. And this is the ticket.
Yeah, and I love that you shared that because I think also that clarity of mind and it's, all of us, I think, have had times in our lives where we don't actually have a real sense of what we actually need. That space to understand that just isn't prioritized a lot of the time, right? And I remember this, Courtney's doing the nonviolent communication course in her community right now. One of those things is identifying needs and being able to share needs. And as I was going through that, I realized actually a lot of people don't share their needs and don't make requests, right? And I thought that's really, really interesting because that's such a limiting thing personally to be able to grow. It really does set us up for that lonely journey of, individualistic society, which is quite common in North America, right? And very different in different cultures like Asia, where it's more collectivist. And a lot of the work I've been doing has been in Asia. Of course, there are different issues there,
Right.
right? Because when it's collectivist, people are more afraid to say things because
Out.
of
Yep.
relationships. Um, and I think that solo journey is great sometimes because when you're focused, you can just run, but you can only run so far. And then you run into barriers and, just sometimes small things like today, I was asking you, well, how do I share this on my profile? To figure things out, having that help just helps us go so much faster because then we're not stuck in some online course for months trying to figure it out, right?
Yes. No, it's so true. Actually, this is a great example. So you asked me, do you want to go live together and talk about these things? And I said yes. So in a traditional sense, if people are sort of used to, a certain hierarchy and certain way of doing things, then they would say, Kasha's in charge of getting me the link, and she's in charge of directing me on what's happening. But when you have a relationship and it's much more a co-creation and a back and forth, and it's not this person's in charge and this one's over this one and all of this dynamic, then we can do what we did. What we did this in like 3 minutes flat. You're like, ask me this. I'm not sure this will work. Do you have this? And then we figured out the easiest thing is to go on my link and then share it from there. It allows us to solve the problem, do the thing we wanted to do, and we don't care whose link it is. We don't care who figured it out. We don't care who did this, who was in charge of that. We just arrived at the place we wanted to arrive. And this is what it can look like. And for so long, entrepreneurs in particular have worn, figuring it out on your own. This whole idea of I don't need anyone and I don't need anything has been worn as a badge of honor, right? And what we're realizing now is like, oh my gosh, what if I did do it differently? This was something that I began to practice about starting about a year ago. And I decided to do it with my dad and Derek. So this was an easy place for me to start, right? The two people I trust the most. I know they care about me, but it was still hard for me because I like to figure out things and I traveled solo and I was that same like you. I'm happy to go to dinner alone. I'm happy to go to the movies. You want to come, you can come, but I'm definitely going, and going by myself don't it doesn't hurt my feelings, right? So I began to practice this. And then I want to say it was about May. I sat Derek and my dad at this table and I said, and my dad's a life path one, Derek, super independent. Both of these men, so independent, never asked for help, right? And then you got me in the middle. And so I said, I think the three of us need to work as a team on everything. And it's going to be to the point where we're really uncomfortable. And I'm going to lean fully on you for this. And I want you to lean fully. And we began this dynamic. And gosh, it was insane. And some of you have watched it happen, how much we accomplished in a short amount of time. My dad's real estate business that was already booming just blew up even more. All of the stuff we created much faster with more success. And that was just three people who came together, right? And if you can take that up to 5 or 10 or 7, whatever it is, and really play in this dynamic of, I'm not going to figure everything out the slow and hard way. I'm going to pull on you for this because you actually know this. This is at your fingertips. And I'm going to ask you and I'm going to make a request of you to that point where it's super uncomfortable and highly beneficial.
Yeah, it's such a great point, right? Because I think a lot of the time conflict or tension is perceived as negative. And, when we have that safety of relationship, when we have the maturity to move through that, that's what it takes to actually have a real relationship, right? Because if it breaks up over just some minor difference of opinion, and it's exactly the same with our personal relationships, partners, etc. If we can't have those difficult conversations, and share perspectives and work through our feelings and share, this is what I need. This is the impact that it's having on me. And a lot of the time, people just never get comfortable enough to have those uncomfortable conversations, right? I see this with my clients as well. And I think that it's a big limiting thing with our personal relationships right now. And as you mentioned, opening up conversations, it's not just an issue in networking. This is an issue with dating. This
Oh
is why
God,
people don't have partners, right? Because that has disappeared. That skill set has disappeared
totally
in
disappeared.
our society.
You're so right. You're so right. It has, and it's really fascinating for me to observe this because it has changed a lot. Even in 10, 15 years, I sometimes think everything I teach related to networking could be taught in dating because it's very fascinating. And so many people actually have convinced themselves that life would be better if they just stay single and they have this type of life. But oh my gosh, I can't also but help notice like the number of people who are depressed or battling mental illness or feel like such a lack of fulfillment who don't understand why am I even here? There's a correlation here because you and I have both lived in cultures where people are much more interdependent and work together a lot and it's a different dynamic. So yeah, I agree. I mean, the number one way to grow and to become everything you can be is through relationship. And because it will stretch you and you will have to have differences and you will have to talk things through, the growth doesn't happen because we avoid all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you mentioned that, I was thinking about one of my friends, Rissel, who's an entrepreneur in Australia, in Sydney, because we met in a course ages ago. And she has a dating introduction agency. And not only does she do the introductions, but she has an in-depth interview with both parties to know if that introduction is going to work, right?
Yep.
But aside from that, she has all this add-on stuff that she has to do, which is like the personal coaching and consulting so that actually somebody can be going on a date and succeed, so that they can be in a relationship and succeed. And I really think that's something that we need to all think about in our business relationships as well, is that how equipped are we to have those conversations, right? And that's what I've been working on with a lot of my clients in the global space because they're working across different cultures. They're working across a wider scope a lot of the time. So they're used to that in-person contact, but now they have to work with all of Asia, right? And so how do they adjust to that? It has to be a very different type of leadership. And that curiosity piece is absolutely essential. The empathy, building understanding is essential. They can't succeed without it. And that's something that I think um, often the speed that people are trying to do things fast and tick the boxes and, just not actually getting all the data that they really need to be able to create something that's valuable.
It's true. You talked about having an idea and it just wasn't time for it or wasn't the place for it. This mastermind that we're in right now is the mastermind I've tried to create. God knows how many times, probably 24 times, right? And the time wasn't right, the place wasn't right, the people weren't right, the environment that we were in, the place we are as a society. But here's the thing that I found fascinating. And when this mastermind started popping off and people started joining it, then I knew it was time because I actually knew it wasn't related to how I was marketing or promoting it. Because I had a conversation with Derek in November and said, I'm going to drop the mastermind idea. It's not, people just aren't there, right? And he said, not quite. Give it one more shot. It was actually Derek's idea to keep the mastermind because I said, take it off, take it out of the funnel. And he said, let's give it one more shot. And from the day he said, give it one
Thank you,
more shot,
Derek.
yeah, right. I would say it was almost exactly 2 weeks later. It just started the payment notifications. And he was like, it's the time. I go, who knew? Like it's literally just things lined up. And the thing that I did, since I was going to scrap this anyway, and it came as the biggest surprise to me, right? Is I said, well, I can approach this group totally differently than I have in the past. You know why? Because this group formed because this group wanted it to form, not because I wanted it to form, because I had already let it go. And not in an angry, like I'm going to wad it up and throw a tantrum. It's just like, I'm not attached to it. If it's not going to be helpful, if it's not the time, then let's not do it. Let's not force something. So the fascinating thing is I came into this mastermind with the least amount of expectations, plan, attachments. And it's more like I'm going to listen, like this is what I do during the calls, during the messages I get before, during, and after. I save all of that. And so then the conversations and the offers and the content then just supports what everybody is actually talking about and wanting. But see, sometimes we feel like in order to facilitate something, we have to have all the answers and we need to plan from A to Z. I we're in January. What will we be doing in August? Who knows? The group will inform it, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, it's so true. And I was curious, like from your perspective, really, what are the qualities of the people that you want in the mastermind? What is it that you want to be seeing from the members? Because that helps
Mm.
me as well to be the best member that I can be.
Well, I mean, you're the model member, right? And this actually, you and Sarah, right? You were the seeds. You all have walked with me through so much time and so many experiences and through that first round of experimentation. And when you and Sarah said yes, you both laid the foundation for this and are the pillars. And so what do you and Sarah have that then pulled in the rest of the members? Because that's actually how I see it. I always notice the first two, three, four people who join a program, everyone who joins after is actually similar to those people. So you and Sarah have like a real deep commitment to what you do, a dedication and a devotion. It's not, you're not flippant about what you do. It's not, well, if I do it, I do it. And if I don't, I don't. If it works, it works. Like it's there's a lot of care. There's a lot of heart in it. And people know this, they see this, they feel this. So other people who joined also had that, they have that characteristic. The other thing that you and Sarah are, you're incredibly generous.
Thank you.
There's a certain type of entrepreneur, and we've all encountered them. Um, they're in it for number one, and they could be in anything, and they're not going to contribute anything. They're going to take and take and take to get what they want, to get where they want to go. And I get that. Everybody wants to go somewhere. Everybody wants something. But there is this element of exchange, and you and Sarah are masters at gleaning and receiving and growing and benefiting, but not leaving it one-sided, also contributing so that both dynamics are healthy and in play. And that's what we are seeing in this group. You told me early on, like, do you think other people will give input? How can we sort of open this up and let them know you have permission to do that? And sure enough, they did, but you went first. You
Thank
you
you.
showed them how.
Yeah, and it's an interesting that's I guess, sometimes the uncomfortable thing of being a leader in a space where you don't know if that's how you should be leading or if that other leader is okay with how you show up in a space, right? And so sometimes figuring that out can be uncomfortable. And also so important to have the conversations because, I know I regularly check in with you. Are you okay if we talk about this? Are you okay if we do that? Because I think it's important to be in agreement. And I know you share so, so much openly. So I have the assumption that most likely you're going to be okay with that. And I don't know if it's the right time for it. I don't know if that's really what you want to talk about today or if you want to talk about something else, right? So to me, that's the depth of communication. And I'm certainly not I wouldn't call myself the model. I'm
You
still
are.
improving. I'm still learning. I'm still looking at, have I thought about everything that I need to think about? There are times that I miss opportunities for sure. And often it's because I've been preoccupied with other things, right? So we all have our own things going on in life and preoccupations. That's why it's so important to kind of like poke each other and say, hey, have you thought about this? Hey, are you open to that? The more we can do that for each other, the more we can all, benefit from our interactions and relationships. And we've been
Yeah.
doing that with a few of the members the past 2 weeks. For me, it has been a real feeling of lightness and like you've got that big paraglider on your back, and I haven't ever done this, but I'm imagining I have a friend that does this, and I know that there are times, she's crashed and she's injured herself, right? So sometimes when you take off, you don't know if you're gonna actually be successful with something. And I felt so much lighter and, like I've had the people around me to help me understand how I can make things work, right?
Mhm.
So that's been incredibly valuable for me. And I know that, all the CEOs that are successful out there, they are in peer groups, right? They have other CEOs around them. And I have a friend who I'm interviewing next week who created an app for anxiety. She was part of a community, for tech founders that was really important for her. And she ended up going to Richard Branson's Necker Island as an entrepreneur and, shared some of the lessons there. So it really showed me that importance of having that community. And then these are the things that show up in life to make you realize where you need to put your focus and energy. And for me, that's here in the mastermind and, with the peers that I have found that I feel I can have the right conversations with to support each other.
And this makes me happy to hear because this is really what it's about. Is if everything can feel lighter and easier and we can get to where we want to go with more ease, we can run barefoot or we can get in a car and go there together, which one sounds more fun. And I think you brought up a good point too about different leadership styles and personalities and some leaders, you know, um in their programs or masterminds, they really only want, their voice and it's set up that way and, they have a reason for it. Um, and, you've asked me so many times, are you good with this or are you good with that? And this is the thing I've observed about people who lead leaders is if you have a group of leaders and you're not bringing their voice into the conversation, you're missing out, right? I would be missing out. Other people would be missing out if there wasn't this choir of voices and this back and forth and this healthy conversation. If there was only, one person at the front of the room who's, talking for 2 hours, like I know you've referred to before, it's just not the same experience. And this is also something I think that's evolving is, we're asking ourselves, do we really need that? Do we want that? Do we benefit from that? Or would we rather sit around a table, so to speak, and have this back and forth in this dialogue so that I'm not being told what to do. I'm learning to think in new ways. I'm expanding my point of view so then I can do what I do better. That for me that's what I'm after, and that's how I'm benefiting from this group.
Yeah, I agree, right? There are always going to be things that we don't know how to do, right? No matter what we are doing. And so to be able to move faster, to accelerate, we have to have those people that can help us have insight and perspective. And, I was working, I think, this like leader who I met with once a week, every week for religiously. He never missed his appointments, for a year. He's one of the smartest guys that I know. And he still showed up every single week because it helped him get perspective. Sometimes it is really about talking it out loud, right? Instead of just keeping it in our head. And often when you are leading in a challenging environment, you really have to have that because often you're really alone there. And it's hard to get perspective from the people that are around you because they don't know either, right? So
Yeah.
it's not always possible to even give each other's answers. Sometimes we influence through questions, right? Through more of a coaching approach. And that's what I've been working on with my clients who are in organizations because that approach is not common at all. But now they're facing situations, they need to innovate. They're facing situations that they haven't faced before. It's a completely different world that we are in right now, right? So I started to also see this need for stronger support networks 3, 4 years ago when I was, working with people who were getting laid off from their jobs in global tech companies. Lots of people, amazing people, smart people, right? And also I was having to um, help make decisions about who is going to be laid off, right? So when I was working with senior leadership, with executive, team members, they had to make those choices. And I saw that there were going to be a lot of people falling through the cracks, and a lot of people, especially at that stage, it was, I would say, over 50,
Mhm.
early 60s. I had one person who was 64 who reached out on LinkedIn and said she got laid off from a bank and she was an analyst. So
Mhm.
that's what stopped me in my tracks and helped me think, wow, this is finance. This is not a, executive assistant. This is going to be something way bigger than what we have seen for a while. And now, of course, it's also impacting younger people. So, as you know, I saw that it's going to create a whole other generation of entrepreneurs who never planned to be, consultants or coaches. Of course, we've seen a lot of that, but also in other areas, right? And I think to have the right container, so to speak, to have these masterminds, the peer communities that can really create that level of support and interaction where people don't feel alone, that
Mhm.
saves on the wasting time, right? Which you talked about on wasting energy and really on being able to, fail faster if we have to fail, because that's inevitable sometimes in entrepreneurship, right? So I had a similar vision to you. And at the same time, I was not working with many entrepreneurs. I had several clients at different stages who were in the process of, early stage startup in tech in Singapore. And I remember there was a time that they thought they were going to fail. And that's when the chief technology officer reached out to me and we had a conversation. It was a free conversation and it gave her the lift that she needed at that time. And then we ended up working together later. And then, someone in India who was scaling over 300 employees, right? And had to create a different leadership approach at that time. And then I had a client who was going through IPO and, was in the process of going public. So very different stages. And that was my first, I guess, lesson into what can happen in a startup environment and how different it is, how much more dynamic it is, and how much closer the communication has to be able to get things off the ground and keep things moving.
Mhm.
So I really admire the entrepreneur's, road. It's not an easy one, but really, I think in terms of the human growth, the connections that you build, and the desire to do something that really matters, to do it in the way that you want, in the sense that it helps you to create the lifestyle that you want if you don't work 16-hour days, which I have done sometimes as well. There are times that we have to really pull ourselves up and make sure that we're truly living the life that we wanted to live when we started this process. And then there are times that you have to go harder and, you know, make sure that certain aspects are in place.
Mm,
So,
so true. I think, one of the things when you talk about the shifting of companies and layoffs, and I mean, we can see this in the world. There's a lot that's evolving pretty rapidly. And, I did a live yesterday where I was talking about the importance of coming back to this knowing, this really firm knowing that ultimately you can create what you want, no matter what's going on in the larger picture. And that's also what I want to be able to re-emphasize and reinforce in the mastermind is it's easy to get caught up. Like if you start looking around, right, you can go, what's going on in this world and where are we headed? And you can begin to feel the ground moving under your feet. And, for someone who they're changing their direction in their business, or that career path that they thought were on is like, it doesn't even exist anymore. It can help us because we can come back to this point of, even though this isn't what I was expecting, this isn't what the plan was, it doesn't really matter everything that's going on out there. If I can figure out what I want to go on in here, then I can take the steps to make that happen. And that's one of the things I love about entrepreneurship too, is that it's this real taking ownership of my time, my thoughts, my actions, my relationships, so that I get what I want. I get to have a good life no matter what else is going on around me.
yeah, and it's amazing to be able to have that. And at the same time, sometimes that level of freedom is really scary for people. And the sense of overwhelm that they have is really, overpowering. So that focus is so, so important. And knowing where to focus, it can be challenging sometimes, right? To make those choices and where to invest our time and energy. That's always the biggest question for me at this stage is where to invest time and energy. And I think that, that awareness of what really matters to us, what's important, what is non-negotiable is so, so key, right?
Mm.
Because then if we don't have that clarity of mind, we end up, doing all kinds of things that just aren't valuable for us in the long run, right? Scrolling
Oh, right.
instead of creating. And that's a big problem, right? For a lot of
Oh,
us
yeah.
sometimes.
Oh, yeah. One of the things I think it was Alex Hermosi said is one of the key steps to do first is to eliminate everything that is not related to what you want. And because he was saying it's the focus becomes like the gold in any situation. If you can have a focus and you can be focused on this thing, you can get this thing. It's all of the other stuff that becomes the enemy of that. And so knowing who to say no to, what to say no to, what gets my time, what doesn't, what gets my money, what gets my attention. So being really clear on this is not getting it. This is, and then now being able to refine, I think this is it. And, this is one of the things that's vastly different between education and degrees and corporate climbing versus entrepreneurship is there's a lot of busy work in this arena over here. We recently brought our kids back home to do homeschool. And what's fascinating to me is in homeschool, how quickly we get stuff done. In that school, they could be there for 8 hours. It's like, well, I don't know what you guys were doing, right?
Mm.
Same thing with a job. I mean, most people, if they were honest, they could get their work done in a very short amount of time, but we got to fill it in because we got to look like we're busy and like we're doing something. And so in entrepreneurship, we're forced to go, what keeps us in business? What actions lead to getting a client? What conversations, what relationships lead us to having cash flow? Because in the beginning, That's literally all that matters. If you don't have cash flow, you're not in business. And if you're not in business, then you got to then go take some of your time and energy and put it somewhere else to pay the bills. And that's the crunch that people get into, right? Whereas if they would just focus on what will lead to cash flow today, they probably wouldn't have to, you know, divide themselves up into so many places.
Yeah, and I think, your point, along with that communication to understand what really is needed is so important, right? Because when we're doing things that don't really lead to anything because we don't have that depth of understanding, right? Or knowledge of the how, the skills, right? Which is what you have taught a lot of these skills for connecting with the right people, the storytelling pieces, right? All of that is so important to learn and to be able to then apply. And applying sometimes it's not an overnight thing for everything, right? Like some things you can apply pretty quickly, other things it really is a practice and evolution. But even, when we think about like marketers, they still do A/B testing, right? It's
Yes.
not just
You're so right. You have to experiment. You have to test over and over and over. You know, even when you're good at what you do, you got to throw something out there and see if they think it's good, right? Even if you've done it a million times, you're so right. You can never skip that step.
And I think that, the final thing that I wanted to share is that belief in what you're creating is so important, right? Because there can be doubts that come up, and certainly they have sometimes for me. And, the whole thought process of, is this really going to work? What, is going to show me that it works? Well, we don't know until people sign up, right? So I think that length of time between when we start to share something and when we decide that it's going to work or that it's not, we don't often give it enough of a rep, right?
Mhm. Yes.
And that time and commitment to wait and see, that perseverance is so, so important, right? And tweaking things along the way.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. One of the things that I have observed is that if somebody doesn't go all in on whatever it is, right? The all in can be the most detrimental thing. Because if you're 74% in and you're talking about it and promoting it and having conversations and posting on social media and emailing lists and all this, even if you're doing all of those things over an extended period of time, if you're not all in, I don't know how it works in this world, but I just know it's true. Other people will know you're not all in and they won't, no one's going to go all in on your thing if you're not all in. We
Yeah.
can never expect more of others than we expect of ourselves, right? So that's the first thing that I've observed about myself and others is if you go all in, like this sort of crazy all in, that makes us a little concerned actually, because we're going to look stupid. Well, we will definitely look more stupid if it doesn't work when we go all in. And this is why people don't go all in. Yeah. They
Yeah.
reserve a little for their dignity, at least, somehow that makes sense in our mind. But when we say it out loud, it doesn't. So that's what I've noticed is number one. And then you said another thing. There's a level of an intensity that's necessary to lift something off the ground. So once we have traction, once we have momentum, it's a totally different story. But to lift something from zero to people are saying, yes, there is a level of intensity that's required that I think almost everyone underestimates. When I tell people, you're going to do a launch, you're going to launch this membership, you're going to launch this program, you need to do 7 to 10 posts on social media every day for like the next 14 days. They're like, excuse me? And that's how it works. You can post every other day for 6 months, but you probably won't get many results. But if you can go high intensity and then low intensity and rest, it'll work a lot better. You can get a result much faster. But also, what you said, you have to tweak it as you go. I had this lady in a group recently, and she said, "I know if I just keep going, it will work." I said, "Well, not exactly. Not exactly. We love to tell that to ourselves, Nobody's responded to this for the last 3 weeks, but I know if I just keep going, they will. I said, no, how about we tweak it? How about we refine it? This isn't speaking to them. This isn't inspiring them to pull out their credit card. This isn't getting them to move. So let's tweak it. And sure enough, a few tweaks, oh, people are starting to move. So it's like you have to go all in. You have to be high intensity. You do have to be willing to do things for longer than you think you're going to have to. But also, if you don't make adjustments as you go, if you don't listen to the feedback, which crickets is a feedback, and make adjustments, you might just bang your head on a wall for a long time and
I love
nothing
that you
good.
say that because,
It's not gonna change. Huh?
yeah, I love that you say that the crickets, that it's feedback, right? Because, yeah, sometimes we don't realize that silence is feedback. And I think that that's a really important thing to know because all of a sudden, I see people saying, oh, everything isn't working. Facebook has changed, right? Yes, things do change. The algorithms change. And at the same time, it can also be what we're saying is just not resonating, right?
Oh, oh yeah. And here's the thing. Anytime I hear people say, "Oh, social media has changed and the algorithms changed, and the way people buy has changed," I'm just like, "Yeah, what world are you living in? This is changing all the time. This is constantly in motion. This is not what matters. What matters is that response to it, saying, "Well, then I guess that just means sales are down, and I guess I just can't be in business anymore. So now." My full-time job is to complain and to gather people who are also having a similar experience. So then we can all just talk about how it's not our fault instead of adapting and adjusting and looking at, because here's the thing, if people don't want to buy in this way, I can guarantee you they want to buy in another way. I had a client one time, she was convinced, I want to say this was like 2017, right? So no matter like what year you pick, people will be convinced that this isn't working anymore, right? And so she was on this, it was a private session. So for like an hour, I'm listening to this rampage of how business is dead and online and saturation and all this not, and I'm just sitting here like trying to keep my sanity, right? But she needs to get it out. And finally at the end, she's like, so, and I talked to this person, that person, they're experiencing the same. And I remember I don't know how it came to me, but in this moment at the end of the call, I said, so are you telling me that no one spent any money today worldwide? Not a single dollar. Like there's no money changing hands today or this month or this season. And she went dead silent. No, I don't suppose that's true. Yeah. There has
Yeah.
literally never been a moment in time that money doesn't circulate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year globally. And so when we start having this conversation and we're talking about algorithms and how people buy and Facebook's dead and little, what we have to do is pause and go, oh my gosh, I'm having this conversation. I'm perpetuating this belief because I'm actually unwilling to grow.
Well, and that's where that community comes in. The opportunity to have a different perspective on that as fast as possible is
As
so
fast as
important
possible.
because, yeah, I mean, that's where you just have people complaining together, right? Yeah, okay, there's a sense of camaraderie around that, but is this helpful? Is it going to change anything? And it's one of the things, like I noticed here when I was having conversations, government has had various change here, and I was having a few conversations to understand what's happening. There's a huge sense of scarcity, and I thought, do I want to be involved in this, or would I rather be doing something else? I'd much rather be going to the Galapagos and putting my energy into creating that, to be honest. So I had to be really honest with myself, like, am I, because I thought, oh, here I am. I'm here. I don't really feel that connected. Maybe there's a way I could contribute my skills here, is one thought that I had. And I thought, you know what? what do I really want? I want to go on another adventure. I haven't been on one for quite a while. Last year was a tough year for us. My partner was really sick, and I thought we may not have that many opportunities to do these things later. I don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows, right? There's a whole lot of change in the world. Everybody's talking about Greenland. And I just, listen to it on this side of my existence, and then I focus on the Galapagos, right? Two G's, and a very different energy and focus around it, right? I don't really have any desire to get anxious. I remember last January, there was a lot of anxiety in the air with everything, and I was paying attention to what was going on. And this year, I just decided there's really no value in me spending a lot of time and energy there. I'd much rather focus on what I want to create, who I want to be there, and make that happen because it's a very different quality of life that you're living in lead up to that, right? And every single conversation that we're having has an impact on us, on our energy.
Big time, big time. This is something that how we suffer unnecessarily by entertaining, by paying attention to things we don't want to pay attention to, by perpetuating a conversation that we don't actually want to be our reality, by gathering people who have also had a negative experience about it. This is how we suffer unnecessarily. It's also how we waste a ton of time and energy. And it's like, that's why I said in my life, multiple realities exist at once. There are some people who are happier and lighter than they've ever been. There are some people who are more anxious than they've ever been. And both are true. I saw a post on social media just this morning, and this lady said, anyone who tells you that you can get sales from social media, they're lying, they're blowing smoke up your skirt. And I was like, that's her reality. And then there's people who, I got payment notifications during the last live and this one, and that's my reality. So we are both living a reality that's true for us. She's not lying. She's not wrong. I'm not lying and I'm not wrong. So then the question becomes, which reality do you want? Go put yourself with the people who have the reality that you want, because I'm going to tell you something, it's contagious. Attitude, perspective, success, it's all extremely contagious. It happens by osmosis, and the wealthiest people know this.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, right? And I think you're completely right there. And I have something that's sort of been on my mind with profitability because I have seen so many sales leaders, they're so focused on this number that this target that they have to achieve. And I completely agree. Like you cannot have a business without that, right? You have to be bringing in money, and it's important. But if you only focus on this target, you don't see all these other things that are so important, right? And if you give that energy out, that you only just want to earn $1 million this year, get to your $1 million year. Well, what else is a part of that? What else is going to help you get there? And I still share this because I think it's such an important lesson where so many businesses focus on these target numbers. And I share the story of Peter, who was at LinkedIn. He was getting like 87% of their target for Asia Pacific, right, as their sales leader. And it was only when he brought more curiosity and more of that collaboration with his sales team. And he started helping them with coaching through obstacles with, various different perspectives instead of just focusing on, pushing them to like a horse, right?
Yes.
To win the race.
Yep.
And that is what opened up so much more opportunity, right? People felt that he cared, that he was curious. He wanted to know what they were, wanting to focus on which relationship mattered. And when he decided to do that, it was totally his idea. It wasn't my idea. I was working with him and he said, "Oh, this is really, really good. I like this. I'm feeling really empowered. I'm going to do this with my team." When he did that, he started hitting over 200% of his target in just a few months, 3, 4 months. And they were navigating obstacles at that time. There were the protests in Hong Kong, the trade wars. There were various obstacles that were in their way. So they had to figure out a way around that. And coaching, the curiosity piece, really that depth of understanding helped them navigate it together. And then he moved companies to Salesforce and ended up going over 300% of his target there, right? And let me tell you, when he decided to leave, he was so missed. His team were so loyal to him. And this is what happens with leaders who really take that approach, is that their team members follow them around if they can. They'll move companies. And I have seen this multiple times where 5 people move together all of a
Mhm.
sudden because they trust each other, they know how to work together, they gel, and they can move faster that way. So when people get displaced, which I've also had clients, they've been in a role for 20 years, sometimes they get displaced all of a sudden. And they don't know how that happened. It's because another leader was brought in and they brought their team a lot of the time with them, right? And I think a lot of people just don't see that happens. And, of course, they get emotional about it. In the end, relationships are what make business work, right? It's the foundation of it. So
It's true. And
I think,
I love that you brought Peter up. This is a great story and example. And you're right. It's not just driving something forward. It's looking out instead of just forward and then being able to see how it all comes together. I love that story. And I mean, the numbers tell the whole story, really.
yeah, exactly, right? So we have to pay attention to the numbers. He actually stopped looking at his team's numbers. He just said, "You guys are the CEOs of your, territory. You look at your numbers. I'm not going to look." And that was such a, you know,
That
moment
was
of
huge.
faith
Yeah,
for
and they felt his belief. Like, I don't need to sit here and remind you where you at and why you're not higher and how you're missing the mark and how there's a gap. Like, you got this. And it's wild what will shift what like that. He believed in him.
exactly. That's what made the difference. It's leadership, right? And that's the difference between leadership and just management, where you have all this push and oversight, and you're not making the cut, and negativity that can come into that. And there was a company that I was coaching at, which was a coaching company, and their management was not aligned. They were pushing their sales staff. I had a client who was interacting with their sales staff, and she told me what their sales calls look like. It was not good business at all
Mm.
to approach people that way. And I ended up leaving because of that. And in the end, I was coaching their sales team members, and they were complaining to me about how they were being treated by a company where the culture should have been much better, should have been more aligned. So it was not a place that I wanted to stay, because it felt out of integrity for me to be there to support something that was just not actually living their values and their own approach that they were selling, right? So sometimes we find ourselves in these interesting situations where there's a real lack of alignment. And even though there's opportunity there, it doesn't feel emotionally aligned. And eventually that starts to deplete you. And I think the emotions are another thing to really pay attention to, how we feel with people, how we feel in a situation, because that is data. And a lot of the time, especially in organizations, emotions are completely discounted. They're not talked about at all. It's not considered business. but everybody buys because of their emotions
Yes.
and, the alignment with them. So I think that is something that's discounted, and there's a cost to discounting that as well. And it's so important to make sure that, we look at how we interact and what people feel around us, right? And it was really funny. I was chatting with Lee in our mastermind, and she was playing with AI and prompting it to generate an image of how we interact with our AIs. And when I put the prompt in, it created this little robot, and I was giving the robot coffee, and the coffee cup had a little heart on it. And it was hilarious to do that little experiment. So I suggested to Lee to put that prompt in her mastermind because I think it actually is a really good insight to how we interact with people. And, the robot had a big smiley face
Mm.
on it. So there was an element of warmth and connection there. And I won't, let the curiosity build if Lee wants to share her image, but it was very different. Also, connection and warmth, but in a very different way. And it was displayed in a different, image, completely different. So I think that's a great little exercise to do. And, if we're all interacting with AI to see how it perceives our interactions is good insight. So thank you today. I really appreciate, all of your support along the way, over the last few months and all these years. And sometimes I'm continued to be amazed, how you find our learning edges. And at the end of that, I know that that is entrepreneurship. It is creating what is needed. And that's exactly what you do. So thank
Mm.
you for that.
Thank you for saying that, Kasha. I'm loving the ride, and here's to the next thing. And I so appreciate you being in the mastermind and for this conversation. Until next time, I mean, anything final thoughts that you want to give?
No, I'm great. I think that, just if there's anybody that really feels that they are alone in their business, it's such a good opportunity to reach out and connect with Monique or I, and, we can let you know if it's a good fit for you. Monique, I know that I'm often asked, same with, when I'm organizing the trip, who is coming? Who's part of the mastermind? And so that's a big question that people ask. So that might be a good way just to wrap up if there's any
Mm.
thoughts about, when people are wondering if it's the right fit for them.
Yep. Good, great question. So this group, I want to say first, is going to be capped at 36 members. I felt like that was big enough to have some synergy, small enough to feel like there's intimacy and I could know everyone and everyone could get to know others. We're at, I want to say 23 members right now. And who's in the group? These are all people who are very committed to their work and who have big ambitious goals. I would say somebody who doesn't have a desire to grow probably wouldn't feel comfortable in there because a lot of the conversation is about growth, and not just growth as a business and bigger numbers, but understanding the growth first happens right here. When I grow, the business grows, right? The revenue grows. Also, the people in here, what I love, honestly, is the variety of ages. We have a nice range. We have someone under 30, we have someone over 60, and that difference in perspective, experience, wisdom, it's very dynamic. So that's something I'm personally proud of and know that will be beneficial to everybody. Men and women are both welcome. We have Jeff. Jeff is holding down the fort for the men right now, which we love having him in there. And what I would say is, I think people who, even though it might feel risky, are willing to give one more go on this whole idea of truly having a community and opening up to be vulnerable enough to see what's on the other side of what I don't know yet.
I love that. Yeah. And it can be exciting. That's the adventure in leadership. And that's one of the reasons I called my podcast The Leadership Adventure, because it really is an adventure. And who's, along with us is so, so important. So thank you for creating that space where we can gather and, support each other.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. And I look forward to having any conversations with people who this might feel like a good fit. And until our next conversation and adventure together, have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you so much for joining us. Bye, Kasha.
Bye, Monique.